Hello, welcome to another edition of Big Secue Visits. In this edition we are visiting the Inveralmond Brewery in Perth, Scotland.
Hooray!
This is Ken Duncan, the head brewer, and we're now going to go and have a look around the brewery and see how they make their beer.
Good plan. This way. Starting off with malt and barley. Big bags. Nice. Big Secue.
Yeah.
Big bags. Probably be able to see
Have a look in there.
inside there. And that's enough beer to make 129 gallon casks.
129 gallon casks.
It's more than I can drink in a day. Kids, don't do this at home. So malt and barley, that's our raw material. That's what we're starting with.
So is that just pale ale malt or?
It's pale ale malt that we use as the core of all of our beers. And what we're looking for is a nice plump corn or kernel, and a good friability. Nothing to do with bacon and eggs.
Yeah.
Friability. I'll just get rid of those. Is the crumbliness. So I can just break them with my fingernails and not have to go to the manicurist like I normally do. And
so you mill that yourselves then?
That's right. So we're using whole grain, and we'll put it through our mill, and then ends up in our grist case. So we follow the path of the malt itself. So we're now malt can. Right. So we're in the big bag, and we get the forklift, lifts up the big bag, comes in here, and it goes into the hopper. Basically hoisted up here, and there's what we call a sock at the bottom of the bag. Open that up, and open the slide, and there's up that big white tube behind yourself there is an auger or a screw, an Archimedes screw. And what that does, that turns around and it takes the malt up there, upstairs. And if we follow that long white chute, pipe rather, we can see it goes up into that blue, green and cerise. I'm a little bit colourblind, so I always say cerise instead of red. And that's our mill. Okay. And inside there we have two rollers turning like that. And the grain drops in between the rollers. My fingers are going to get squashed right now. And we've got a gap of it's 1.55 millimetres.
Right, okay.
And the grain gets crushed by the mill. We're not making flour. It's not the Aberfeldy water mill trying to crush up oats. We're not making bread. We're making beer. So all we want to do is crack that grain open. So I've got the grain there, and I'm just doing that. And that's all we need to do. Enough to crack that husk so that we can get into that starch. The grain of the grist, as it is, the grist from the mill, then goes up next to the auger, and that drops it into the grist case. And you can see there's a big stainless steel box upstairs at what I call a jaunty angle to the dimensions of the room. The plan was to have it in the corner, but we found that when we actually got to put it in, it was too tall for the corner, so it's out in the middle of the floor. So it fits under the roof space. The hot water comes from this tank here. From the Bavarian. There's a little code, HLT, and that stands for hot liquor tank. Liquor is what we make the beer with. Water is what we wash the floor with.
Okay, what's the difference?
The liquor's in here. It's the same stuff, really, but just old-fashioned technology and old-fashioned names and old-fashioned jargon.
Do you treat it at all?
We add a bit of gypsum for some of the beers and a bit of chalk for others. The darker beers we put a little bit of chalk in, or calcium carbonate if you like, and gypsum, which is calcium sulfate. So for a beer like Ossian, which is quite a bitter beer, we'll put a little bit of calcium sulfate into the mash. We'll mix it in with the malt, in fact. And that basically helps to give the crisp hoppiness and the crisp bitterness that we're looking for in that type of beer. If we were making a stout, for example, there's a famous Irish stout. I don't need to mention its name, but where's that heart gone? It's not made from the Liffey water. No. It's water from the Wicklow Mountains. They're chalk mountains, like the White Cliffs of Dover. and the water is full of chalk, and it's really very good for making very dark beers. The acidity of the roasted barley, which is what makes a stout black, will make the beer quite acidic in its flavour. Great, but that's water. Most of beer is water. Very important part of our.
It's an important part.
So we end up with hot water, hot liquor, and we mix it together with the crushed malt, the grist, in the mash tun. And all that happens is that it comes along that white pipe down. The water just happens to go this way to meet it, and it hydrates or wets the malt at the meeting point, and it falls into this big tank. There's the equivalent of me and a big wooden spoon. There's a big motor and a big paddle stirring it very slowly, and it takes about 20 minutes, 25 minutes to fill up to about here. And that's 750 kilos, 3/4 ton of malt, and about 2,500, 2,800 litres of hot liquor. So we end up with a temperature inside here, a single infusion mash temperature of between 66 and 68 degrees Celsius, depending on the beer. Right. Frackeldowers will be 66, Leofale will be 68, Ossian 67. And this is just the way that we decide what flavour we want, how much residual sweetness we want in that beer. And that is decided at this stage in the mash tun. We're trying to turn starch to sugar, but we're turning it into two kinds of sugars. One's the yeast can eat, and one's the yeast can't eat. Yeah. We've all cleaned up after a party. What a sticky mess. And that's because beer is sweet.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the reason that we put hops in the beer, to make it bitter, so that we get that sweetness, the maltiness, and the bitterness, and the hop aroma to give a really good balance to the beer. And it sits in here for about 1 hour, 1.5 hours, depending on the brew. At the bottom of this mash tun, mixing pot, is a sieve, basically. And that holds back the grain husks, which go down this hopper and up that pipe. And there's an auger in there that takes the spent grain or the draff off. There's a big trailer outside, and that goes off to feed the cattle. So what comes from the land goes back to the house.
Very ecologically sound.
Correct. The wort, as we call this, the liquid that comes out of the mash tun, it basically looks like this. That's actually cleaning fluid, caustic. On Friday afternoons we'll do a caustic brew, and that sits in over the weekend.
What's the name for this?
This thing we call a grant.
A grant.
But a grant come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. They can be big, long troughs with lots and lots of taps. But what we call this glass tube a grant, and it's just so that we can see what's coming out of the mash tun.
The English have got a different name for it.
They might call it a wort receiver.
Wort receiver.
Something like
Ours
that.
is there. Giving it a name. It's called grant.
What happens initially, we draw it off very slowly, and it comes out, lots of grain is in there, and we'll pump that back in again. That's what this pipe is for. It comes back out there and back in, so that we get clear wort coming out after about 20 minutes. Yeah. We just recirculate it back around and around and around, very, very slowly, and basically all the grainy bits get stuck up top, and we end up with the clear wort coming out the bottom. The mash, mixing it all together, right, letting it stand, and the enzymes turn the starch to sugar, and then we have the recirculation drawing off the first wort, the first cloudy, grainy worts, putting it back, recirculating it slowly, and then when we deem that the wort is clear enough to move into the kettle, then we'll pump it into the kettle. And what we do in this brewery is, as soon as we start pumping the wort over to the kettle, we'll start sparging. Right. And we've basically got a big arm that goes around like that, about that speed. And on my arm are lots of holes, and water sprays out onto the surface of the grain. Right. So as we're taking out the liquid from the wort, from the mash, we're spraying on or sparging. And that's another old word. Right. Sparging water on top of the grain, and it's percolating through the husks to try and get as much of the sugars out as possible. And every brew has its own level that will fill to. In the same way that every brew has its own recipe, it's the same amount, different amounts of water, and different levels in here. Brew length, correct. He's going to take over now. So we're filling up the wort kettle with the wort, obviously, and kettle, because this is where I earn the title brewer, because this is where I boil. And we've got steam. We've got a steam generator. If you look, you slowly pan over to the right. You see a very shiny silver chimney. Oh yeah. And that's the chimney that comes off our boiler, and that's where we create the steam, which heats up the hot liquor tank on this side, and then behind me it heats up the wort in the brew kettle. And we boil for about an hour to an hour and a half, depending on the brew. And that's the bit where, you know, what boiling and wort is like. It's a big throwy thing, big frothy thing. We want a vigorous boil, we want a really active rolling boil, so it's going like a mad thing, to basically clarify the beer, make sure that the proteins in the malt, which can cause a haze, by being boiled very vigorously, they get bashed together and stick together to create what we call the hop break.
You put any additives in at all to try and assist that?
At the end of the do, we put a bit of what's called carrageenan. It's a type of seaweed. Oh, right. Yeah. And we just have basically just ground up seaweed, right. But not any old seaweed. Carrageenan is the type. And we put that in the last 10 minutes of the boil, and that helps to draw some of these. It's a very long protein molecule, like an octopus. Yeah. And when it's in the boiling wort, when it cools down, basically what it does, it coils up and it drags lots of these cloudy proteins into a big clump. The more mass that something has, the faster it will drop. So if you get big clumps of things in a liquid, like in here, they will drop to the bottom of the kettle, and then we can decant. We basically decant out of this at the very end. So we leave all that stuff in there, and it doesn't go into the fermenter. Yeah. And in the wort kettle, of course, as I've said, that's where we put the hops in. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you there, Ken. Do you mind if I go to the toilet? Yeah, sure. You know how to go? You know, yeah. Which way is it? Is that way? It's that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, mate. How's it going?
What are you doing?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I just nipping at the toilet.